Hi, I am Jessie Rebik, and we are here to discuss how to get started on your finished monochromatic still life painting. So at this point, you should have done a value study. Okay, so that should be completed. You should have done the value scale. Okay, so that's your scale from lightest to darkest. You should have your prepared canvas. Okay, so when I say prepared canvas, I mean that it has been tinted and the composition has been either directly drawn onto the canvas or transferred indirectly. So that should be done and you're ready to begin painting. And the first step of the process is to just block in your very darkest darks and your lightest lights. And so that's what we're going to do. I've got my easel height adjusted. I've got my references here, as well as the actual subject that I'm positioned in a way that I can see simultaneously while I'm doing the painting. I've got my brushes. I've got my cart with my mineral spirits and medium, paper towels. Everything's ready to go. Okay, so this is where you can see what the point of the tinted canvas is. And so this very first paint application is just the whites and the darks. Okay, so just straight white and straight raw umber. Or if you choose a different dark, it'll be that. Okay, and because the canvas is tinted, it acts almost like charcoal paper in the sense that you can add your very lightest lights and you'll be able to see it, as opposed to if you're painting your very lightest lights on white canvas, a lot of times it's going to get lost. Okay, so I can start adding these edges, kind of defining the shape. I can start doing that in this stage. So I'm starting with the highlights. And it might pick up the pencil mark just a little bit. So if your whites look a little bit gray at this stage, it's possible that you're just kind of picking up some of the pencil if you've used pencil to kind of sketch your composition. And that's okay, because you're going to paint right over it anyway down the line. I've got two brushes, one for white, one for umber. There's no point in using the same brush because I don't want to get to any middle values yet. I want to keep these values nice and pure. And when we did the color or the value study, I talked about kind of almost thinking as the shape of the shapes like paint by number. And in this case, we're not really doing that because we're trying to define the edges and kind of see those the three-dimensional form as we are adding the lights and darks. So I'm not going to fill in the whole shape. I'm going to just try to pick out where those areas of highest contrast are to help define the edges. So to kind of make the edges of the foreground sort of come to the foreground, kind of make them pop. Okay. So I'm just going to kind of blend out any area. I don't want to create like outlines either. So I'm going to blend these out just to kind of soften the edge. And again, I will be painting over it. So if it's not perfect, that's okay. Okay, so I'm going to start adding my darks. And I feel like the darks in this particular composition kind of make up a lot more of the space. So this might be a little unbalanced. It'll probably be darker than it is lighter to start with. Okay, so again, I'm finding those edges. Okay, I'm just going to kind of blend them out. Okay. And when I'm kind of like thinning the paint down with a dry brush, that's known as dry brushing or scumbling. So that's what I'm doing right now, is just kind of spreading the paint kind of away from the darkest area, and that what's left, what the that kind of textured spot is called, is scumbling. I'm using liquid as my medium, partly so that it will dry fairly fast. For the finished painting, we're going to work in layers. Okay, so unlike the value study where we did it all in one sitting, the finished painting is going to be done over the course of several sittings, whether that means several days or several weeks, or however long it takes you. But knowing that, you want to think about like how fast you need the paint to dry in order to continue to make progress. And this is where a lot of times students, if you need to, have your paint dry by the next class period so you can go ahead and work on your next layer, then this would be why students would choose to use liquid over linseed oil, because it does dry faster. Okay, so again, I'm going to kind of scumble the dark away from the edge. I'm not going to try to blend it yet with anything lighter. I'm just kind of allowing the paint to thin. So the shadow is a lot darker right under the object, and it kind of softens as it gets around the outer edge of the shadow. That's why I'm kind of softening it around the edges. Okay, so I'm starting to block in some of the shadows in the fabric behind the skull. So again, I'm just kind of blocking in these shapes that I see. This is kind of that where the fabric meets the tabletop. Let's see, anywhere else? All right, so that is pretty close. Actually, I do see one area that could use some blocking in. So this isn't the very darkest dark, but I'm going to give it some dark just to help define this edge, kind of where that temple area is behind the eye socket. So it's not going to be this dark when it's all said and done, but that will help me just to kind of keep track of where that cavity is on the surface of the skull. And this that I'm defining right here is that wooden block that supports the skull. So I'm just kind of creating some contrast there so I know where it sits against the background. All right. Just kind of mark where these spots are. They are not the darkest dark, but I'm just kind of getting them in there. And that, right here. This is kind of that inner layer of teeth, and I want to give it a solid, there we go. Okay, so that should hopefully give me a little bit more, at least the start of some 3-dimension. So it's very choppy and sketchy, but it's a good place to kind of pause and step back and assess and make sure that your lights and darks are kind of going in the right place, that you're starting to feel like there's some 3-dimensional quality. Actually, I might want to get a little bit of shadow against, oops. So again, this isn't the very darkest dark, this kind of area where the inside of the nasal cavity contrasts with the front plane of the kind of nasal area. It's not the darkest dark, but I'm seeing that because the kind of middle value of the canvas, they were right next to each other and it was flattening it. And so I could easily lose that edge if I don't kind of define it now. So that's why I'm putting that in there, just so I don't lose it. Okay. All right, so I'm going to stop there for now. And this gives you enough form so that you can then return to it later. I could keep painting on it now if I wanted to, but I will come back later and I will start adding the middle values. So that concludes the first step in your finished monochromatic still life painting. And we'll move on to blocking in the middle values next. Thank you.